Here we are once again at flickeringmyth.com, which can only mean one thing. My man Anghus Houvouras is fed up. And when Angus gets fed up, he goes ahead and he drops what I like to call truth bombs. And it looks like there's some faulty logic of you're not the intended audience. And I can't wait to see what he has to say about this topic. So sit back, relax, strap in, because when Angus starts dropping bombs, it's one hell of a ride. How's it going, everybody? This is Phil. And like I said, we are here at flickeringmyth.com, and Anghus Houvouras has a new article that he's put up. And I've done a couple of videos now featuring Angus, and he really is just one of my favorite writers. When he tackles any kind of a pop culture subject, and he seems to be in tune and tackling a lot of the issues that seem to be swirling with just fans and movies and kind of like these legacy films such as Ghostbusters and The Last Jedi, and the adverse fan reactions and how they just seem to be marginalized and dismissed. He is a fan himself and doesn't appreciate when his opinion that he feels is valid is dismissed and being treated, meant to be treated so flippantly. I like Angus because he puts together a nice, succinct, coherent thought. And his articles really drive home a lot of what people are feeling, but might not be necessarily able to verbalize it. So, like I said, always happy to feature an Anghus Houvouras article on my channel. And, I urge everybody to go on over to flickeringmyth.com and leave a couple of nice messages for Angus or debate the guy. He's up for it. He's no dummy, and he can handle his own. So without further ado, let's get into this Angus article. So this is about the faulty logic of you're not the intended audience, and which is really interesting because, we've heard a lot over the last couple of years, with movies that come out, people criticize them, and a way of kind of just sidestepping the criticism to say, well, you aren't the intended audience. And the problem with that is, if you're going to critique something, it shouldn't necessarily matter whether or not you're the intended audience. There's plenty of critics who've made a living and given great reviews or poor reviews to movies that were valid. And it didn't matter the color of their skin or their gender. All that mattered was that they reviewed the movie based off of its merits, off of the cinematography, off of the story, off of the acting, off of the directing. And a reviewer without an axe to grind shouldn't be dismissed because he's basing his argument for whether or not he thought the movie was good or bad. He's basing it in the reality of whether or not these elements that make up a good or bad movie were either achieved or they missed the mark. It's an easy thing to say to people when you don't like what they have to tell you about your movie. So let's go ahead and move on and get into this article, because I'm sure Angus has a lot of great things to say about what this topic actually entails. So the faulty logic of you're not the intended audience. Here we go. In nearly 2 decades of writing about movies, the motivating factor has always been the joy of discussing film with others. Whether that cinematic discussion was happening at a bar after the movie, a chat room, or the toxic bowels of social media, the water cooler conversation aspect of entertainment has always been a highly motivating factor. In recent years, the conversation has changed. Not so much the content, but the complexion. It's a maddening mix of hyperbolic highs and vitriolic verbiage that often ends up becoming a messy, infantile mosh pit of malevolence. Let's take For example, Star Wars The Last Jedi, if we must, easily the most divisive movie of the 21st century. It's been said that there's a thin line between love and hate. Rian Johnson's turbulent entry into the Star Wars universe is a fantastic example of how a simple cinematic discussion can turn into a nightmare of political correctness and epic entitlement. Movie discussions used to be binary, that pass-fail mentality that Siskel and Ebert made famous with their thumbs. A movie was deemed good or bad. You debated the merits of the movie and passionately defended your position. Since art is a subjective medium, there wasn't a winner or a loser, just people who love movies having respectful debates about what constitutes a good movie. The good old days. Hi, holy hell, how times have changed. Discussing movies in the era of social media is like jumping into a dumpster fire doused with gasoline. A place where even the most well-thought-out analysis can be invalidated or refuted, where film fans take on a strangely polarized tone and defend movies and filmmakers with the intensity of a political candidate or their favorite football team. That is so true. You see more than ever, movies, people who just rally behind directors, and it doesn't matter whether or not their movie is good or bad. And it is very much like politics. If you're a Dem or a Republican, you'll stick with whatever candidate your party puts forward because that's your team. It really is a crazy way to just kind of go about viewing the world and not being able to just judge something based on the quality or the merits of what it is and what it brings to the table. It's really wacky. It's a real crazy train of thought. These are people out there who actively promote the idea that the DC Extended Universe movies are somehow superior to Marvel movies. Sure, it's a matter of taste. There technically is no right answer. But even the most ardent Zack Snyder defender, myself included, can admit the Marvel Cinematic Universe is putting out superior product. I like the ultimate cut of Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Let's roll up here a little bit. It's an interesting movie, but it's an emotionally obtuse train wreck that I happen to find engaging. The theatrical cut is an absolute nightmare of nonsense. Even though I like the movie, warts and all, I'm objective enough to understand that there are inherent flaws. I'd be stupid to make broad declarations like DC is better than Marvel. This is the kind of logic employed by children when debating topics like who would win in a fight, Batman or Captain America, or who's cuter, Justin Bieber or Harry Styles. Well, I'm certainly, I'm no fan of Harry Styles, but I'm no believer either. So that's a moot conversation. Over the years, I've noticed the growing trend of attacking the critic. Instead of trying to address points made in a criticism, people on the other side of the argument try to invalidate the credentials of the critic. Why bother actually formulating a counterpoint when you could just call them irrelevant or an idiot? Lately, I've noticed a growing trend of trying to invalidate criticism by using the phrase, "you're not the intended audience." It's popping up with more and more frequency. I remember hearing this when I was eviscerating the awful 2016 Ghostbusters movie. After spending a few thousand words breaking down my opinion, I was told, "You're not the intended audience for this movie." The reason? Because I was a man. I'm not, meaning I'm not the intended audience. Are you trying to tell me $150 million summer blockbuster financed by Sony wasn't intended for anyone with a penis? It's a valid point. The Last Jedi was a similar kind of experience. Disliking the film was met with nonsense like subverting your expectations or accusing detractors of being racist, sexist, or any other label that could help negate your criticism. Rose Tico wasn't a poorly written or developed character. You were just a racist sexist who doesn't like Kelly Marie Tran and Disney's attempts at bringing diversity to a galaxy far, far away. It's a garbage argument made by people who don't want to extend the mental effort required to make a counterpoint. It also makes for very boring cinematic conversations. I've written a half-dozen columns about The Last Jedi in an effort to more clearly explain my opinions. To have that met with, well, that's probably because you're a racist, is both hilarious and harrowing. The intended audience argument feels particularly infuriating because it implies that there is a lack of understanding or disconnect. It's the next iteration of, you didn't get it. You're being told you didn't get it, and you weren't supposed to. What an inane and ridiculous concept, especially when applied to movies like Ghostbusters or The Last Jedi. I was thinking about this argument while watching Bo Burnham's excellent 8th Grade, so that's this here. A movie that does a fantastic job of putting the viewer in the shoes of an awkward 8th grader dealing with a gauntlet of identity issues. The movie has been praised by critics and audiences, though I could see it as a film that someone would use the intended audience argument to defend against detractors. Bo Burnham made a very engaging movie about the life of a 12-year-old girl and did it in a way that speaks to everyone. The intended audience was the general ticket-buying public. You didn't need to be a teenager or a woman to understand what the main character was going through. I reject the idea of the intended audience argument. It's a fallacy, a weak counterpoint used by people too lazy or too dumb to develop an intelligent perspective. Are action movies only made for guys? Is the intended audience of a romantic comedy just women? Was Crazy Rich Asians made just for Asians, or Crazy Rich Ones for that matter? Are Kevin Smith movies only for middle-aged fanboy stoners who enjoy watching terribly made garbage? Well, there's always an outlier. There's a fundamental difference between the concept of niche and making faulty, inaccessible trash. So please, do not tell me that the reason I didn't care for a movie was that I'm not the intended audience, especially when making studio movies engineered to make a profit. Angus, again, you clobbered him. Point made and well taken, sir. And look, I mean, this is completely valid in that if you go back and you look at the original Star Wars, it's like, well, it's a kid's movie, it's this and that. But everybody loved it, right? Everybody got it because it had allegories that we could identify with. Okay, there was subtext there. And it used the classic story elements of the hero's journey and good versus evil and rescuing the princess and everything that anybody could identify with. And Luke Skywalker was the everyman protagonist, and not in a way that alienated people. If you go back and you look at these, the classic pictures of people just lining up around the block. You see men, you see women, you see white people, you see black people, and of course the children of all ages. Now it's funny, when you look at these pictures, these classic black and white pictures, you see a ton of adults standing in line. You don't see very many children. And that's the thing. If a movie is done well and it speaks to a person, it speaks to their heart, it speaks to their soul, it really doesn't matter what color the protagonist is or what gender the protagonist is. It just needs to be a well-conceived and thought-out story, and the hero needs to be relatable, and they have to have struggle. And then when they overcome that struggle, it's a satisfying film-going experience for all involved, and it's just basic storytelling. Look, A New Hope, it's not Shakespeare. All right, it draws its inspirations from a lot of different things, but it's not this overly complex story. It's a story that works, and its strength, in large part, is its simplicity, and it's accessible, and it allowed people back then. It was their gateway into this world, and it got more complex, certainly, with The Empire Strikes Back. But that was the reward for people embracing the original concept to begin with. The movie didn't set out to subvert expectations initially, nor did it set out to alienate anybody. Everybody was welcomed. Everybody was invited to go on this adventure, and there were heroes for you to get behind. And everyone had their favorites, including the villains. So, this idea that Angus puts forth here with the "you're not the intended audience" argument being complete bullshit, he's absolutely right. It's lazy, and it's a fallback to being dismissive when you don't like what people have to say, and it's easy to just say that, you take Brie Larson. what she said she doesn't care about middle-aged white men have to say about a movie. They're not the intended audience. Well, you know what? Now she finds herself in a movie coming out in a mega franchise that is deeply relies on, I would say, a huge male demographic, probably a lot of white males. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but you know, you got to be careful because these are the kinds of things that come back and bite you in the ass. Now, look, I'll go to see Captain Marvel. I'm a Marvel MCU fan. I need to see this movie because it leads into the next Infinity War, the sequel to the Infinity War. But taking a cheap shot at critics or a certain section of fans, it can only come back to bite you in the ass on a long enough timeline. Unless you're just going to say what you got to say and then say, I retire, and then mic drop it. But anyway, that's pretty much all I got. And, Angus, he always sums it up really nicely. So, he doesn't leave all that much to say. I mean, it's just a little bit of my take at the end. But I'm on board with this. And it's faulty logic to say that you're not the intended audience. Make a movie that's good, and everybody can access it. I don't understand what this concept of movie makers not wanting universal acclaim or to have a movie embraced by everybody. It just seems counterintuitive to me. And if that's the type of director you are, well then, have at it. But, quite honestly, those types of people have no business, zero business whatsoever, being involved in any type of a mega franchise like Star Wars or Marvel or DC, where the objective with those big movies is to appeal to the widest possible audience. Anyway, look, if you like this video, if you like this Anghus article, go over to flickeringmyth.com and feel free to comment over there. And he does answer back on his comments, so you'll be able to interact with this man. Really cool guy. And if you liked this video of this article, feel free to comment down below. Like the video if it's your first time here. Feel free to subscribe if this is your second time here. What are you waiting for? That's all I got for tonight, guys. It's a pleasure as always. Thank you for watching. Be happy, be safe, be healthy. And until next time, have a good night.